Oh yes, you are welcome back to today's special talk. The African cut out the middleman as the US loses another $1 billion. It has shown to the world that it is only in Africa that the whites, the France, US, the Britain have the power to get whatever they want to get. And just like what is happening in Burkina Faso, how Ibrahim Traore has been hitting on US and other French countries because they don't want the progress of Africa and they don't want to see any African country to develop and to understand what they are understanding. As it is now, the middleman, which is the US, they have lost another $1 billion out of the way they used to do their business. Because once they come, they will claim they are developing your side, they are giving you money, they are giving you fund. With all those money, the other side, they are going to use it to take whatever they want to take in the name of they are giving you fund. So in this video, don't skip any part of it. Try to watch to the end because this video will reveal a lot of secrets concerning the things that is happening between the African and between the American, which is the US. So, I was about to watch, like, subscribe, and share the video to grow and let others see what is really going on in African continents. And thank you for watching.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been incredibly vocal in her acknowledgement that inflation and affordability are still massive issues here in the United States and that the Trump administration has failed to tackle these issues at all. And now Trump, seemingly in a fit of desperation, is making some interesting promises to the American people, isn't he, Cenk?
Prices are up in the United States for coffee. It's up almost 20%. Utility, up 11.7%. And then electricity is up 5.1%. And vehicle repair, if you need your car fixed, it's up 11.5%.
Africa just delivered a geopolitical shockwave that Washington never expected. For decades, African resources moved through a familiar pattern. Foreign companies, especially from the United States, positioned themselves as the trusted middlemen, controlling trade routes, processing rights, and supply chains. They decided the prices, they controlled the contracts, they took the biggest share of the profits. While Africa got the leftovers, but not anymore. In a bold strategic move, African nations have cut the middleman out, completely declaring that African resources will now be processed, managed, and exported by Africa for African benefit. And that single decision has just cost U.S. companies another billion-dollar contract, sending shockwaves across global markets. This isn't just business. This is geopolitics. This is Africa rewriting the balance of power. Washington is scrambling. Analysts are confused. Investors are panicking. Because for the first time in modern history, Africa is not negotiating from weakness, it's negotiating from strength. With new partners, new technology, and new political alliances, the continent is positioning itself as a globally independent economic force. And behind the headlines, a deeper question emerges. If Africa no longer needs the United States as the middleman, what happens to America's influence on the continent? Tonight we dive into the strategy, the numbers, the global reaction, and why this decision marks one of the most important geopolitical shifts in Africa's modern history. Africa has entered a new era, an era where it no longer accepts being the pathway through which global powers enrich themselves. For decades, Africa played the role of the middleman's marketplace, a place where resources were extracted cheaply, processed elsewhere, and sold back at premium prices. The United States benefited heavily from this global structure. American corporations built entire supply chains around Africa's raw materials while keeping the real profits outside the continent. But today, a new narrative is emerging, bold, unapologetic, and deeply strategic. African nations are cutting out the middlemen, reclaiming their value chains, and refusing deals that leave them with the crumbs. And as this shift unfolds, the United States has found itself losing another billion-dollar contract, one more signal that the world order is changing faster than Washington expected. The story begins with a growing trend happening quietly across the continent. African leaders, economists, and technocrats have been studying global trade patterns for years. They've realized something. The countries that dominate world power are not the ones selling raw materials, they are the ones controlling processing, manufacturing, and export standards. Africa's minerals, crops, energy, and manufacturing inputs are the backbone of global markets, but Africa rarely controlled what happened after extraction. The profit margins were made outside the continent, and the United States was one of the biggest beneficiaries. However, Africa's new strategy is simple. If the world values African resources, then Africa should capture the largest share of the value, and that means cutting out foreign middlemen. The contract that the United States just lost represents far more than money. It symbolizes the shrinking influence of American corporations on a continent that used to be a guaranteed market. What makes this shift more dramatic is that Africa's move wasn't accidental. It was calculated, coordinated, and perfectly timed. Over the last decade, Africa's workforce has expanded rapidly. Young engineers, data scientists, agritech founders, and energy specialists began entering the workforce. Local industries, once weak and fragmented, started gaining structure. African governments pushed industrialization policies, set tariffs on raw material exports, and invested in processing plants. Suddenly, American companies noticed something they had not seen before: competition right inside Africa. The U.S. assumed it would always be the preferred partner. After all, it had decades of legacy contracts, deep diplomatic ties, and dominant multinational companies. But Africa's emerging industries no longer wanted to serve as suppliers feeding American factories. They wanted to become the factories. The recent billion-dollar contract that slipped through America's fingers involved strategic resources critical to U.S. supply chains. Traditionally, these contracts were almost automatic. American companies would extract, refine abroad, and send back the finished products. However, this time Africa refused. Instead of exporting raw materials, African governments demanded local processing, local jobs, and local value retention. This requirement instantly changed the game. American corporations, heavily optimized for offshore processing, weren't ready to shift their operations. They insisted on maintaining their old model: control the supply chain, minimize Africa's gains. They agreed to build processing hubs on African soil, transfer advanced technology, train local workers, and keep a majority of the profits within the continent. In the past, these demands would be dismissed as unrealistic or too ambitious. Today, they are the new conditions for doing business. Washington was caught off guard. Reports from U.S. analysts revealed growing concern that Africa's changing approach threatens America's manufacturing base, especially industries that depend heavily on affordable raw materials. What used to be cheap and easy access is now becoming expensive and competitive. Behind closed doors, think tanks warn that the U.S. is losing influence in sectors that will define the future: minerals, agriculture, energy storage, telecom infrastructure, and even green manufacturing. Africa is no longer simply selling resources. It is negotiating leverage. The U.S. loss of this contract triggered political debates. Senators questioned whether Washington underestimated Africa's industrial awakening. Economists warned that losing African partnerships means losing access to supply chains that power American technology, agriculture, and energy. Lobby groups representing American corporations pressured the government for intervention, arguing that Africa's refusal could set off a domino effect across the continent. But the truth is deeper. Africa is not just reacting, it is executing a continental strategy. Organizations like the African Continental Free Trade Area (AFTA) have laid the groundwork for a massive industrial bloc. African nations are tightening trade rules, harmonizing tariffs, and making it harder for foreign companies to exploit loopholes. Local entrepreneurs are receiving funding. Governments are adopting value addition laws that force mining, agriculture, and energy investments to process raw materials locally. Tax incentives reward companies that build factories on African soil. As these policies tighten, foreign middlemen find themselves being squeezed out. American companies that once enjoyed preferential access are now competing with rising African firms and losing. The U.S. can no longer rely on old geopolitical assumptions. Africa is not only choosing new partners but also choosing itself. Critics in Washington argue that this shift could destabilize U.S. industries dependent on African resources. They warn that increased local processing could raise global prices, disrupt supply chains, and accelerate inflation in certain sectors. But African governments see this differently. They see a long overdue correction. For decades, the continent subsidized foreign prosperity. Now it is building its own. The geopolitical implications are massive. First, Africa is reducing its dependency on Western economies. Second, new alliances are emerging with partners who respect Africa's industrial goals. Third, the U.S. risks losing long-term strategic access to sectors that are becoming essential to global power competition. The contract loss also damaged U.S.-Africa diplomatic relations. African leaders are tired of being lectured about free markets by countries that themselves use subsidies, sanctions, and trade protections to preserve national advantage. Africa sees the hypocrisy and it has started acting accordingly. Meanwhile, local populations feel empowered. Across the continent, young people are celebrating the bold moves of their governments, seeing them as steps toward economic freedom. Social media is filled with commentary praising Africa's ability to dictate terms instead of accepting them. There is a growing sense of continental pride. Africa is no longer begging for partnerships. It is choosing them. Inside Africa's industrial hubs, factories are buzzing. New processing plants are being built at record speed. Technology transfer agreements are creating new generations of African specialists. In many ways, Africa is building exactly what Southeast Asia built decades ago, a foundation for high-growth manufacturing and export power. American corporations, however, are struggling to adjust. Their business model relied on Africa not having the capability to resist. Now that Africa does, the US is learning the same lesson Europe learned with Asia. Once a region decides to industrialize, no global power can stop it. This contract loss is not isolated, it is part of a trend. Over the last 3 years alone, the US has lost deals in energy, grain, telecoms, aviation, agriculture, and infrastructure. Each time, America believed it was unbeatable. Each time, Africa proved otherwise. The political narrative in Africa has also changed. Leaders now speak confidently about value retention, national sovereignty, and economic independence. Gone are the eras when African officials apologized for demanding better terms. Instead, they now say, if you want to work with us, respect our rules. Global analysts describe Africa's new position as one of strategic assertiveness. For the first time in decades, the continent is shaping world politics instead of reacting to it. This shift is sending waves through Washington, Brussels, and other Western capitals. But for Africa, this is the natural evolution of a continent that has carried the weight of global supply chains without enjoying the rewards. As the US scrambles to understand what went wrong, Africa moves forward with confidence. The message is clear: the era of middlemen exploiting African value is over. A new chapter has begun, one where Africa owns its resources, controls its contracts, and shapes its future. And as America watches another billion-dollar deal disappear, it's becoming painfully clear that the continent it once underestimated has finally discovered its power. This is no longer an isolated story. It is a geopolitical revolution. Africa is cutting out the middlemen, and the world is feeling it. In the end, this story is so much bigger than a billion-dollar contract. It is bigger than America losing one more deal. Bigger than geopolitics. Bigger than diplomacy. What we are witnessing is the rise of a continent that refused to stay silent, refused to remain dependent, and refused to be defined by the world's expectations. This moment, Africa cutting out the middleman, is the moment generations before us prayed for, dreamed of, and fought for in silence. For decades, Africa's wealth left the continent before Africans even touched it. Our minerals built foreign cities. Our crops fed foreign nations. Our oil fueled foreign industries. Our young people were told to accept less, to wait, to be grateful. We were told that the global system is fixed, that this is just how trade works, that Africa cannot do it alone. But today, that old story is collapsing. The decision to cancel an American contract is not just economics, it is a declaration of self-worth. It is Africa saying, we are done watching others grow rich while our people stay poor. We are done exporting our future at bargain prices. We are done being the foundation of global supply chains, without being allowed to climb them. For the first time in a long time, Africa is not begging for a seat at the table. We are building our own table. Look at what this moment represents. New factories rising where old promises once stood. New skills being taught where ignorance was once assumed. New alliances forming where exploitation once dominated. African engineers, African scientists, African planners, young, brilliant minds finally being given the opportunity to shape their own destiny on their own land. There is something deeply emotional about watching Africa stand tall, watching leaders say no, watching foreign powers finally realize that the continent they underestimated has awakened. The world is no longer looking at Africa as a passive market. They are watching a continent that is now negotiating from a place of strength, not desperation. And yes, America is shocked. They never thought they could lose this deal. They never imagined Africa would reject their terms. They assumed Africa would always choose the familiar path, the path of dependency. But Africa chose differently. Africa chose courage over fear. Africa chose sovereignty over comfort. Africa chose long-term growth over short-term relief. This is not just a business decision, this is psychological liberation. It is a message to every young African out there who has ever been told they are from a continent that must rely on others. Your continent is rising. Your future is shifting, and you are part of a generation rewriting the rules of global power. For every farmer who watched their harvest undervalued. For every miner who dug wealth they never benefited from. For every youth who was told opportunities only exist abroad. This new Africa is your victory. Because cutting out the middleman means cutting out decades of economic suffocation. It means keeping the value and keeping the jobs. It means African wealth finally staying in African hands. And that is something no global power wants to see, but something African people desperately need. And as we close this story, the world is watching. Africa with a new expression, fear mixed with respect. Because once a continent learns how powerful it truly is, nothing can hold it back. Not old contracts, not foreign influence, not outdated assumptions, not geopolitical pressure. Africa has found its voice. Africa has found its leverage. Africa has found its confidence. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of a new chapter, one where Africa decides who to partner with, what price to accept, and what future to build. A chapter where foreign powers must adapt to Africa's terms, not the other way around. So when history looks back at this moment, this billion-dollar contract that America lost, it will not see a business loss. It will see a turning point. It will see the moment Africa finally said, our wealth is ours, our value is ours, our future is ours. And from today onward, no one, not even the world's strongest superpowers, can take that away.
Oh, yes. This is a very welcome development. It shows that the African continent, they are growing. They are gradually and slowly growing. And definitely, they are going to get to their permanent site. The issue of these our colonial masters, the France, US, Britain, UK, and the rest of them, the way they used to do things, they used to do as if nobody can talk to them or nobody can speak. And the main problem the African continent is having is their leaders. They have very corrupt tyrants and very, very myopic leaders who don't think about the future of their people. What they are thinking is only for their family and for their selfish interests, how they will fly out and how they will give them visa to France, to US, and to other countries for them to come and visit and come and have some tea with the president of those countries. That is what they know. So they don't used to think about the well-being of African continents, and they don't used to think about how they were going to develop their own country. And this has been the main problem African continent is facing, just like what is happening in Nigeria today, where our Nigerian is ranking the number one poorest country in the world and the most corrupt nation around the globe. And the leaders, they are seeing the leaders as the most corrupt leaders. So everything is down. So nothing is working. The system is not working. Students, once you went to school, finish, come out, no job for you, nothing for you. So, and it is the way it is in almost all the African countries, because they are well satisfied to please their pay master, those people that pay them, those people that call them. So they are well to please them, and for them to please their own country, the country they are leading, they cannot. They believe that once the foreign country praise them, it is when they believe that they are doing well. But their own country will be dying in poverty, die in wretched, and they die in different kind of thing. Then the leaders, they don't care. They don't care what they will do, and they don't care what the people is facing through. So this issue of contracts, the middleman, the US losing the contracts, billions of dollars contracts secured in Africa, they have lost it. So it's a very nice one. It is a sign to show you that some of the leaders, they are growing. Some of the leaders, they are growing. And if they keep on this method of development, at the end, they are going to get to where they are going. But it's because of one of them, one of the leaders must be a Judas that will go out and they leak the secrets of what they have been planning to do. And all those things is what caused a very big problem in Africa. So our speech and our say here is, let African rise up. Let all the countries in Africa, the leaders and the youths and those people that is within the corridors of power, they need to rise up and they need to understand that time is now. The clock is ticking and everything is right now. Nobody will develop your country for you, and nobody will come and save you. It is only you that will save yourself. And they know any God from anywhere that will come and direct you what to do. It is only you and you by yourself that will direct yourself without anybody pointing hand at you and telling you do it this way. So it is time for the African to rise up and to defend their continent and to defend their country against these colonial masters. Because after colonizing Africa, they went on to their home, start issue of recolonization, to the extent that they don't want you to see the vision, they don't want you to see the light which they have seen in their place. So they don't want you to see anything. That is what is there. Well, my people, I would like to hear your comments down below. Like, subscribe, and make sure you share the video to go and let others see what is really happening in Africa. And through your comment and through your subscription, it is where we get our own support from you. And if you like what we are doing, I would like to hear your comments down below, and I would like you to subscribe for us for more of our updates coming up. And thank you for watching.